Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Pecoriello from WeatherOptics, and we have a special video update on Hurricane Florence, which is now a Category 2 hurricane just about 170 miles off the coast of North Carolina and beginning to slow down now as it makes its final approach to the coastline. So we have a lot to talk about here, but most importantly, what I want to stress right from the beginning is that just because we are now seeing a Category 2 hurricane as opposed to a major Category 4 or even Category 3 storm, it does not make this storm any less dangerous. The problem with this categorization scale is that it's only taking into account wind. So we saw winds 130, 140 miles an hour before, now they're down to 105, but actually when we look at the aspects, the most dangerous aspects of a hurricane, they are not the wind speeds. They are the storm surge, the rainfall, and the overall flooding and the scope of impact of a given storm. So again, this is kind of a misconception that I want to make sure is clear to the public, and that is that this storm is still extremely dangerous. So what you can see that's happening here, and I'll go into a little bit of why Hurricane Florence has weakened. You can see these dry pockets of air that are starting to infiltrate Florence's center. You see it on the left side here to the west of the storm center. You can also see that it's kind of become more horizontal. It's not as symmetrically shaped at this hour. And that's due to some dry air, some shear, which is high-level winds kind of blowing these cloud tops a little bit away from the center, but it's also helping to ventilate the storm, right? So the storm is expanding out further and bigger, but the inner core is not as intact and not as strong. So you're not seeing these crazy winds, but still, I want to remind you that winds of 100 to 105 miles an hour are still going to do serious damage to the coastline. So please take this storm as seriously as possible. We have no changes in our forecast in terms of overall impact other than slightly lower winds. So let's dive in right here. First, I want to take a kind of an overview of the entire storm. So you can see the United States East Coast compared to Florence. And right off the bat, you can see that these outer bands extend all the way from parts of Florida all the way up to the mid-Atlantic states. So we're talking about a stretch of hundreds of miles that Florence is impacting. And that'll, again, slowly move westwards as it makes impact with the coastline. The storm will either remain its current size or continue to expand out. So the scope and the size of the impact is absolutely massive. This almost reminds me of kind of the size of Sandy and some of these other large storms, even Irene, that kind of as they neared the coastline and lost some of their strength, they really expanded out. So they largened the area of impact. A little more detail on why Florence is weakening, why we saw a Category 4 down to a Category 2. We're seeing a lot of wind shear, especially towards the coastline. A lot of times, these computer model guidance, it struggles with getting the exact wind shear correct, right? So we're seeing a little bit higher wind shear towards the coastline, allowing some of that dry air to work its way in, and some of these cloud tops to kind of be blown away from the center of the storm. But again, we're seeing the storm expand, and we're not seeing a large amount of weakening. This is not enough weakening to make the storm something that is going to be of lesser impact. This is still going to be a huge blow to North Carolina, South Carolina, and then states further inland. Kind of as a reminder to keep going off what I'm saying, this was Hurricane Ike back in 2008, and you can see what happened here. Here's the coastline. You can see on the top. This is before Ike hit. All the structures are in place. You have houses on the coastline. And then after just that storm surge and rain moved through with Category 2 status of winds probably around 100, 105 miles an hour, all of these houses were wiped out. All right. So storm surge, which is, again, water rushing in from a hurricane, can absolutely destroy areas. And we've been harping over this for days and even weeks now, that the storm surge with Florence will be very, very significant, and that the coastline is likely to see impacts kind of similar to this, unfortunately. So once again, take the storm very seriously. All right, let's dive into the rainfall aspect of the storm. Another thing that we watch in terms of the most dangerous parts of any given hurricane. You can see there's this area of bright pink. And by the way, this is from weathermodels.com, the ECMWF model. A great site to get kind of all your latest information on computer model guidance. You can see across parts of southern North Carolina and northeastern South Carolina, that's where we expect these biggest rainfall totals to happen. So we're talking about 10, 20, 30 plus inches of rain, and that's because we see the storm slow down right before it makes landfall. So we're talking about days of just the same heavy rain, wind, and storm surge kind of wrecking these same areas over and over again before finally it moves inland. And that's the other aspect of the storm that we really have to take seriously, is what happens once Florence moves past the coastline. And we still think it'll be extremely heavy rainfall totals towards parts of interior South Carolina, interior North Carolina, and towards those higher elevations, even parts of Tennessee, Virginia, and then eventually potentially up towards the mid-Atlantic. So we don't want people to underestimate that this storm is not just the coastline, it is inland as well. It's not going to take very much for when trees weaken due to wind and these crazy saturated grounds. We've seen almost record-breaking rainfall across some of these areas just this summer alone. So these interior sections as well as the coast are going to be dealing with just a ton of water. And that is going to cause huge issues starting later today, tonight, and through the weekend and even into early next week as Florence kind of doesn't have many places to go before a trough sweeps it up and takes it further north. Kind of just zooming in on these rainfall totals a little bit, you can see the area we're really concerned about is right around from Wilmington, North Carolina, down towards Charleston, South Carolina. We're talking about, again, anywhere between 15, 20, 25, 30 inches of rainfall. And I would be willing to bet that somewhere in between here, as the storm slows down and stalls, we'll see totals probably beyond 30 or 35 inches, which again is going to cause huge problems combined with a storm surge of just water pushing inland. And you can see even further inland towards kind of the southern spine of the Appalachian Mountains, these are rainfall totals of 7, 8, 9 inches, and this will do an incredible amount of damage, I think, for these areas. And I'm worried that this region out through here, a lot of areas where people actually have evacuated to, I think they're underestimating just how bad Florence is going to be once it comes further inland. We're talking about extremely heavy rainfall totals and also some gusty winds. No, we're not saying 80, 90 miles an hour necessarily, but 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gusts combined with this kind of water, again, is going to cause huge issues. Again, just looking at the overall size and scope of the windshield with Florence, you can see how massive it is. It's stretching from parts of northern Florida all the way up towards Delaware and Washington, D.C., and this is this evening, 8 p.m. on Thursday. These tropical storm force winds are extending literally hundreds of miles down the coastline. I mean, just the overall scope of the storm is absolutely incredible. It reminds me of something of a Sandy or an Irene, where just the size of impact was massive, almost mind-blowing. And you can see through the weekend here as we get into Friday, later on Friday, these winds slowly inch inland and continue to kind of affect the same general area with a hyper-focus on the Carolina coastline. As we go through more specifically here, again, here's the ECMWF showing maximum wind gusts. And this is in knots, right? So actually they're going to be a little higher when we look at the conversion to mile per hour. So don't be confused here. But we're talking about already, this is currently right now, we're already starting to see 40, 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts just off the coast of the Carolinas. And as we move forward in time here, you can see this slowly inches towards the coastline. And now we're talking about 93 to 100 knots, which translates to over 100 mile an hour wind gusts. And this is for Wilmington down towards the North Carolina, South Carolina border. So again, you can expect that, and now this is Friday morning, wind gusts anywhere between 90, 100, 110, maybe even 120, 125 miles an hour. Again, sustained winds are down to 105, but that doesn't mean these wind gusts can't climb a little bit higher. So this area of the coastline here is going to see probably extreme damage from some of those stronger wind gusts. Again, combined with that storm surge, combined with 20 to 30 inches of rainfall. So for kind of these outlets that you may be following that are saying, okay, Florence has weakened to a Category 2, this is great news, it's not going to be as bad as expected. I challenge those forecasts and those outlets because the combination of these aspects, the size of the storm, the still high wind gusts are going to cause plenty of problems here, and I believe it's going to be quite serious. So as we keep going through here, you can see slowly Florence comes on shore. Finally, now this is Saturday, Friday night, Saturday. It's only moved a few, maybe 10, 20, 30 miles from where it was originally just 18 hours ago. So, I mean, it's just hours upon hours of water piling up along the coastline. We have this wind coming from offshore, and then we have 70 to 80 knots of wind coming well inland here, and now moving over towards South Carolina. Now we're moving into Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and now we're down into Charleston where we're seeing the same thing. These are wind gusts of 80 to 90 miles an hour, combined with heavy wind, extreme storm surge, and you have to watch this northeastern quadrant of the storm. This is where the winds will be strongest. This will be where the water is piling up the most. So we're talking about a storm surge of 10 to 15 feet. So that's a rise in water of 10 to 15 feet. Any houses, any homes, any structures that are kind of below that level are going to be completely flooded out. And again, you can see the expansive wind field here. We're talking about gusts down into Florida, down towards Atlanta, all the way up toward the Appalachian Spine. As we move forward here, you can see that continues, right? And we even see some enhancement towards the Appalachians. This is 60, 65 mile an hour winds now up towards the southern spine of the Appalachian Mountains. And again, towards Atlanta, we're seeing 50 mile an hour wind gusts, okay? And continued, this is now into Monday towards the coastline. Florence is not out of the hair of the Carolinas. We're seeing wind gusts 40, 50, 60 miles an hour still water kind of coming in from the coastline. So you know, beyond just the actual intensity of the storm, it's days and days and hours of these same types of impacts. And we saw something kind of similar with Harvey last year. Obviously, it was a Category 4. It was stronger, but the same kind of stalling aspect and having kind of a localized, and in this case, a widespread area of continuous impacts over and over. That's not going to bode well for these areas. So let's get into the actual specific impacts that our team has put together from WeatherOptics. Really no changes from yesterday, okay? We think extreme impacts are going to extend down from Wilmington all the way to Charleston. Let me get back here. Wilmington all the way to Charleston and even into parts of Georgia. So this means the potential for catastrophic damage. We could be talking about months of efforts to actually clean up this area in terms of power outage, damaged homes, and damaged residential areas. And this is a massive strip of land, but we really expect Florence to come in like this, then move and slowly kind of meander south, southwestward, and then eventually hook around into the Appalachians and finally exit the region. But look at the expansive area that we've highlighted under severe and heavy. I mean, this goes all the way back to Tennessee, all the way back to West Virginia, all the way out towards nearly Atlanta, where we're talking about the potential for some devastation, weeks of cleanup, and property possibly destroyed. Even in our heavy impact zone, again, the main threats here are going to be the flooding. Gusty winds as well, of course, but flooding, I'm really concerned about people underestimating what's going to happen in here once Florence kind of exits the coastline. We're going to see days of heavy rain and flooding for these areas. Surge, this is the first or second deadliest aspect of any given hurricane. And we're talking about a 10-plus foot storm surge, especially along this part of the North Carolina coastline. 10, 11, 12, 13, even 15 feet of storm surge kind of racing in here and through multiple tide cycles. So it's not going to be one hit during the storm. It's going to be 6, 7, 8 hits over a few days. And even as we move down towards parts of South Carolina, parts of Georgia, and even up towards the East Coast, we're still talking about a massive storm surge. This storm is huge. So it's not just one area that's being impacted like we might see with a normal hurricane. It's going to be a stretch of hundreds of miles down the coastline. Again, looking at the rainfall, this is kind of our latest forecast, 15 to 24 inches of rain expected right around here, and that extends almost out towards Charleston, where another swath of 8 to 15 is expected. I know a lot of people have evacuated further inland, but there's still going to be huge issues with 6 to 8 inches of rainfall extending up toward the spine of the Appalachians, out towards Atlanta, where we could see 4, 5, 6 inches of rain, I think, especially in some localized areas, especially the further to the east that you go. And this rain shield is going to extend all the way out towards parts of the center of the country, Kentucky, Nashville, parts of the southern Ohio Valley, especially as this storm hooks around. Here's a look at the wind gusts. We might have to lower these a little bit, but I still think it probably does a really good job at getting the overall scope of what we're looking at in terms of winds. This area right here, upon immediate impact, we're talking about wind gusts 105 to 110, 115 miles per hour. Again, that's going to cause significant damage to this area. And then as Florence slowly meanders to the south and to the west, we're still going to see some top wind gusts, okay? We're talking about 90, 100 miles an hour, even into this area. And then it'll slowly move inland, lose a little bit of its strength. So still, gusts to hurricane force can be expected even a few hundred miles inland. And then once Florence really takes off towards the north and to the west, still 45 to 50, maybe even 60 mile an hour wind gusts scattered about through the Appalachians, through parts of northern Georgia, through parts of interior South Carolina, and obviously interior North Carolina. We could even be talking about next week once it heads up towards West Virginia and Virginia. These strong wind gusts accompanied by very, very heavy rain. Last but not least, this is what we're kind of looking out for next week. This is possibly the hardest aspect of the storm actually to pinpoint right now. But there is the chance with this record-breaking flooding across the mid-Atlantic, we need to draw attention towards what happens with Florence after it makes landfall. And we're giving a moderate chance of some significant flooding towards Richmond, towards D.C., towards Baltimore, and even towards Philadelphia. And as we move up and towards the northeast, it's possible that we also see an extension of rain and flooding